It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Streaming live on YouTube as well at the Team 980, where you see Josh Robbins from the Athletic Wizards beat reporter. What's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing well. I drove in this afternoon from Philadelphia. I covered a game there last night. Or at least I worked on some journalism stuff.
Did some journalism?
Did some journalism and ready to go.
Love it. Love it.
Go.
So the Wizards, unfortunately, Josh, they've lost a lot of basketball games in a row. They have lost 15 in a row. They had a 16-game losing streak last season to set the franchise record. They are now on the verge of breaking that or tying that in 2 consecutive years, the first 2 years of the Winger Dawkins era. We knew in both of those seasons that it was going to be really hard to win basketball games. That is in part by design. But the fact that it has been this bad, does it really matter? Or when you're in an NBA rebuild, does the level of bad not matter while you're bad as long as you wind up good at the end?
Well, you better be in position to get a top pick. And you better reduce your odds to fall out of the top 5. And to do that, you have to have the absolute worst record. Now, whether that's the Wizards' intention to be so atrocious is unclear. I think it should be. But
it's easier for us to stay on the outside than those that have to live it and compete every day.
Put it this way, if you have the second worst record in the league, you have a 20% chance of drafting 6th. And if you're going to rebuild, you can't take that risk, in my opinion. You cannot take that risk of hitting 6th. But does it matter? Yes, it matters, particularly for your young players. So Bilal, Koulibaly, Keyshawn George, Alex Sarr, Bub Carrington. Now, these are tough guys, but they're human too. And you don't want to expose your young players to habitual losing because it's demoralizing, it's corrosive. And we are potentially talking about, with the Wizards, seeing them do this not just this year, but next. That's the question. Can these 4 guys in particular emerge from this better, but if at least unscathed? And it's very tough to do that.
So I guess then the big question would be, what do they do about it? Because it's not like they're going to go trade for a great player. They're not going to sacrifice future resources for getting someone to help them right now. Are there things they can do with their rotation? I mean, obviously it would help if Brogdon could stay healthy and all these other things, but Kuzma staying healthy, right? Obviously they could play. It feels like they could play Jonas Valanciunas more. I feel like he might even have a positive plus-minus on the season. I feel like every box score I look at, it's like -10 for everybody except for Jonas, who's +3. So, do they have buttons they can push to eject themselves out of a funk like this, at least temporarily, before maybe returning into it and securing that top lottery odds?
At the moment, with Kispert, Kuzma injured, probably not. Probably not. The answer, though, I think is, let's just say Kuzma were healthy, Kispert were healthy, to really play those guys heavily and not play the young guys as much. Part of the reason why you play the young guys is so they grow. And so you're kind of cutting your nose off to spite your face. Is that the correct phrase?
Yeah.
So you'd accomplish one goal of winning a game, which for the long term probably isn't advisable. And you might hurt their confidence a little bit, just a little bit. I think they're going to continue to go in the direction of playing the young guys. Call it development and hope that they're going to have to make sure they develop them, but also lose games in the process.
Yeah. We're live at Capital One Arena here on the Hoffman Show, Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. A herd of children has just gone by. I'm assuming they're part of some kind of entertainment that the folks will see here tonight. So if you heard a hullabaloo in the background, that is we just had a herd of young girls that look like they're going to go get ready to dance. So I don't know. Whenever that happens tonight, that'll be fun. So all kinds of reasons to come to the arena, Josh. You don't have to respond to that.
Yeah, I suppose, hey, all these arenas have some sort of ancillary entertainment.
It's better than just sitting there in silence in the breaks. Unless you're just like an old school, parquet floor, Boston, just give me the organ.
Sore subject there. I'm not a fan of the whole in-arena host vibe. No matter where it is.
Okay.
The Lakers seem to do just fine. The Mavericks seem to do just fine. The Celtics,
The Mavericks do have the Mavs men, though. They have a troop of 300-pound men who take their shirts off and play drums.
Well, I've never – that's news to me.
Oh,
now,
unless they got rid of the Mavs men. Back when I lived there a decade ago, the Mavs men were a staple.
I don't recall that. There was a portly gentleman in Philly who would take his shirt off near the media seat behind one of the goals, and I can't unsee that.
I think this might be impacting your feelings on an arena host, perhaps. Okay, back to the Wizards. So we've described the conundrum, and I guess like if your choices are either you can not play your young guys and try to win games, or play your young guys and probably lose, but you need to do some amount of winning to not ruin the young guys. Like that seems like an unsolvable problem. So has there been some kind of strategic error made, or is this just kind of how it goes? And are you maybe thinking about other examples of the Thunder? You covered the Magic for a long time, so I know you've had an eye on their rebuild. Like of teams that have done it well, and maybe some other teams that have tried it and not done it well.
That's another great question, and it really is. So I covered 2 Magic rebuilds. The first one, they had a couple of veterans after they jettisoned J.J. Redick, Glenn Davis. Glenn Davis is not a good example. He was not a good influence on the young guys. They didn't have good enough veterans and enough of the veterans. Lately, the Magic's current rebuild has worked well, partly, not mostly, but partly because they have some good veterans there, like Joe Ingles last year. Gary Harris has been there. Washington has good veterans. Malcolm Brogdon, Valanciunas this year, Kuzma to a lesser extent because he's only 28, 29.
Right.
Oklahoma City, you say, well, they were tanking for a year. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander turned out great. Well, by the way, they had Chris Paul there for a while.
By the way, this team could have kept Chris Paul last year. They obviously instead traded him for Jordan Poole, which I think talent-wise is the right decision, but they did have that option.
Chris didn't want to be here.
Yeah.
Not because partly because they were going to lose.
Right. He wanted to go somewhere. He's trying to get a ring.
That would be his preference. But he did not want to be all the way out east. That was another thing because his family's still now based in L.A.
Yeah, makes sense.
So, yes, if they had played hardball with Chris Paul, they could have forced him to play out the contract.
So I think the other thing I think about with those teams, and this is 100% a luck thing on the Wizards side, and like I don't put this at all on Will Dawkins or Michael Winger or anybody else. Like for the Magic when they popped, part of it was they got the guy, right? Paolo Banchero shows up and they take off. And they had a couple years that were rough before that, so maybe that actually is a good comparison. You know, the Thunder rebuild starts when they ship Paul George to L.A., they get Shea in return. Shea's the guy. This team, because of the way the drafts have fallen and where they've been in them, hasn't had a chance to get the guy. They were one ping pong ball away from Wembanyama, but instead they wind up down the lottery and they do what they did last year. This year they have the second pick. It's a historically unsuperstar-laden draft. We know that this year is the year where the guys are coming, multiple. Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey. There's some other prospects that a lot of folks in that space think could be potential superstars. So how much of this is just that there was no other path. They got stuck here because you are subject to the talent pool that is provided for you.
That's a big part of it. Could they have traded Brad the year before he re-signed? Like the February before he resigned.
That's going back to the Tommy Shepard era.
Well, he broke his wrist.
Yeah.
Now, maybe something would have happened in the days before that deadline, but it became moot when he broke his wrist.
Right.
They held on to Brad too long in retrospect.
Of course.
They didn't have the right coach for that group of players whom they brought in. That was a tough group of players to coach for any first-time head coach. So when Michael Winger and Will Dawkins get here, the cupboard wasn't bare, but it was pretty close to bare. It was like my kitchen cupboard.
The kitchen cupboard of an NBA beat reporter during the season. Not home a lot.
This one, I don't want to go into that. But anyway, the roster and future assets, for the most part, were not managed well prior to the arrival of the new front office. Big problem. One of the reasons why the Magic's rebuild worked this time is that they moved their best player at his highest value. They moved Nikola Vucevic. They got 2 future first-round picks, one of whom became Franz Wagner. So they wound up drafting Suggs and Wagner in the same draft. And they still have, and then they wound up getting Jet Howard in the next draft, couple drafts down from that pick. So that's the difference. The Magic had the foresight to tear it down when they were merely lower-tier mediocre. The Wizards waited too long to do it. And by the way, they allowed Bradley Beal to have a no-trade clause.
Right.
Which further hampered it, although Beal was by that time a shadow of who he had been.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a limited number of suitors, and obviously that was even more limited by the teams that he was willing to go to. So it does really, I think that's illustrated for fans, because I think I remember the night that Shepard got let go, and I think we wound up even going late on that show. Like, we were supposed to be done at 7. I was like, I'm not getting off the radio. Like, this just happened at like 6:55. Like, we're coming back after the break, baby. Screw the national programming.
And they kept you on?
And they did, yeah.
That's some big-time power.
Actually, I think, Anthony, was that the night that CK worked the board for me?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, our program director, who had not been on the board in about 15 years, wound up staying and working the board for me that night. But I remember saying, like, I hope people understand now that the hole that this team is going to have to dig out of is gargantuan, and it's hard. And no matter who they bring in, like, if they blow it up, it is not going to be a quick, simple turnaround. And
Right.
So what I wanted to kind of double check kind of through this conversation is that they're actually doing the right things, and that this is a much more of a confluence of circumstances rather than any error. Because, like, if I think of the headline of this conversation, right, we chop this up, we put it on YouTube, I have to pick a headline for it. Like, the headline could kind of be, have the Wizards done something wrong in their rebuild? The fact that they're sitting here on the verge of another 16-game losing streak. And it sounds like, no, they're just kind of in the midst of suboptimal circumstances, or is there something that you think they may have made a wrong turn at some point in these last 2 years specifically since Winger and Dawkins took over?
We're going to learn in the years ahead, and it's going to be several years from now because these guys are 19 and 20. Did they make the right draft picks? Now, I think Bilal is going to be really good.
Yeah.
I think they took a flyer on Alex Sarr, knowing that he was the best potential long-term prospect in a bad upper tier of a draft. Our conversation, because they're in the midst of this losing streak, has been a downer, I would think, for people listening.
Sure.
That's true. But the broader picture here is that for the first time in a long time, since before they had John Wall, this team is bottoming out and using a proven but risky strategy where they're not chasing meaningless wins like they had the last 4 years. This path is what so many of the fans wanted from the Wizards.
Yes.
And now they're doing it. You're right. So much of this comes down to luck, but maybe the most dangerous thing of all, is for them to somehow finish with the second worst record in the league instead of the worst record, and then a 1-in-5 chance they drop to 6 in a draft that might be a 5-player draft or a 4-player draft. So if that were to happen where they were to drop to 6 in this draft, now that would be a disaster.
Yeah. But also there would be nothing they could really do about it. Like, outside of, you should have lost more games, but we've already said that, like, even losing comes with risk because of the potential long-term hamperment of development for your young guys, who, by the way, most of whom have played on good teams and winning teams, and maybe a little bit less on the international scene, and in that way, like, who they've taken is a nice formula for this. But, like, I always think of guys that come out of winning programs in the NFL or the NBA and in college, or they come from college programs to those professional leagues, and they were high school state champions, and they've never lost. They haven't lost 15 games in their life, and the first 2 months in the NBA they lose 15 games. And you're like, what is this? And, like, at least these guys have the international experience of being professionals or in professional environments that maybe they have a tougher exterior to some of that stuff than some of the college guys.
It's extraordinarily tough. Corey Kispert being an example. Now, Corey Kispert wasn't a high lottery pick, but he's someone who won wherever he went, particularly at Gonzaga. And then he's experiencing losing, not even at this level now, but it was tough for him with that.
Yeah.
Part of what makes all this tough is that in 2019, the league changed the lottery rules where if you have the 3 worst records, you have the same exact odds of going first, second, third, or fourth. And those odds are not that much better than the teams with the 5th, 6th, 7th worst record. The difference is that there is an incentive to be the very worst because it prevents you from potentially falling to 6 or worse. Again, this road is full of potholes, and it's not certain to work. And as a matter of fact, in many ways, it's at least a 50-50
Right.
proposition that it's not going to work. But they're at least taking the steps they need to do, I think.
Yeah.
And it's going to involve a lot of misery.
Yeah.
A lot of misery.
And I go back to the conversation I had with Leonsis at the art gallery or the photography gallery down the street here. And he kind of looked at me during and he goes, "What do you want us to do?"
That's right.
And I was like, nothing different. And the unspoken part of that is what you said earlier, which is I wanted you to do this in 2018. I wanted you to do this in 2019. I want you to do this instead of trading for Russell Westbrook. Once the John Wall, Brad Beal pairing, and maybe I have my years wrong. Maybe it was 2021. But like once it was clear that the Wall Beal thing was done, when you trade John, when you end that era, just end the era. And I think that now you're seeing the repercussions of that decision, and because of decisions made subsequently to double down on the Beal-centric nature of things. This is not meant to like beat up on Brad. It just is what it is with the no trade clause, et cetera. Like I think now, if you didn't understand the depth of everything before and how deep the hole is, and how risky it then becomes to climb out of it because it involves this much losing. If you didn't get it then, you should get it now. And if you don't get it now, I got nothing for you.
In 2018, 2019, it's much easier now for us to say with force, in hindsight, that they should have moved Brad. At that time, I don't think that was really realistic for them to do. It would, and I'm trying to think of a...
Well, it's kind of the Vooch thing, right? Like Vooch was a borderline All-NBA third-team type of guy.
Brad's much better than Vooch. And how the Magic got that kind of value for him, credit to them.
Well, I think my counter argument would be simply the bar, and I think Michael and Will understand this, being around guys like Durant, right? And even though they didn't win, like they could have won with those OKC teams, and him and Russ at Russ's peak were like legitimately 5 best, 10 best players in the league. But the bar for being the best player on a championship team is so outrageously high.
Yes.
And like if you don't have that, it is worth pursuing that at all costs, which is what they're doing now. And so my counter argument for Beal, and I think 2018 is the year he made third-team All-NBA, is could you have traded him for 4 first-rounders?
Yes.
And known like, hey, look, this is going to hurt in the short term. This guy's a great player. But he's a great player. That's why we're trading him, because for as great as he is, he's not that.
100. That's a great point. But let's also look at kind of the capital that the general managers at that time had, right? So Tommy Shepard comes in. Tommy Shepard chased that job. Like the majority of general managers who get hired, they chased him he chased the job.
Yeah.
So he didn't have the capital to expend on a rebuild at that time, in my opinion. Whereas now the Wizards, they chased Michael Winger.
Right.
The Magic chased Jeff Weltman, the person who wound up trading Vucevic. So much of this comes down to the circumstances in which the key non-ownership decision maker comes into the job. And by the way, the Beal move that, in retrospect, would have been great for them that you've just described, I'm trying to think of some parallels. Certainly what the Thunder did was pretty close with George and Westbrook, although I think both of them were eager to kind of move on.
Right.
Another parallel, Blake Griffin with the Clippers. And by the way, who was one of the I believe Michael Winger was one of the executives at that time.
That is true.
Now, Blake Griffin wound up dropping off essentially a cliff. He was never. I mean, he really. I guess he had a lot of wear and tear.
Yeah.
But that's a move comparable to the one you, in retrospect, and would have been great for them.
I would say the Sixers too, and although they haven't won a title, like trading Iguodala and starting the process, I think is kind of the parallel that I would think of that had just happened at that time. That was 2015, I believe, was when they did that. So I don't know. This is what makes the NBA fun. It is fascinating. The transactions are so important. Hopefully, eventually, the basketball is fun again. It's going to be rough sledding tonight. Luka's back. He's coming off a 37-12 game. Kyrie is back. Those guys have been banged up. Clay is back. So going to be a tough one tonight for the Wiz against the Mavs here at Capital One Arena. But trying to keep the long term in view here. And Josh Robbins helping us do it. You can read his work in The Athletic. He's doing a great job reporting on all this stuff. He's had some really great stories on kind of this process as well. So, Josh, appreciate you, sir. Thanks for stopping by.
Hey, man, thanks for the great questions.
Absolutely. We'll talk more about the Wiz with Dave coming up at 6:15. More of the Hoffman Show live from Capital One Arena next.